Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
It's our all-English unit for the month of October. It's also our News Watch unit, and we've got a couple of stories to talk about today. We are trying to fight light pollution with bioluminescence. That's kind of interesting. That's happening in France. And then, of course, down in Antarctica, we've got some people from Cambridge, England, hanging out with penguins down there.
I think they're one of the cutest animals on Earth, a penguin. It looks like he's wearing a tuxedo, as we like to say, but they're awfully cute. I don't think I like them enough, though, to go live in Antarctica. It's way too cold there. But we're going to talk about what they're doing there during the summer. I guess the summer's a little bit more tolerable than the winter. But yeah, we've got two stories. This is our all-English unit. So as you know, we don't have our Chinese teacher today. So Tom and I will speak a little bit more slowly and clearly and try to explain as best we can. Get started. We're going to read through both news stories and then we'll be back.
Antarctic summers at the Penguin Post Office. Cambridge, England is cold in October, but not as cold as Antarctica. This is just one of the challenges that face the trainees in Cambridge this month. They're preparing for seasonal postmaster positions at Port Lockroy in Antarctica. They'll spend around 5 months at the tourist destination, staffing UK Antarctic Heritage Trust historical buildings and operating the post office there. However, they'll have one other task that isn't usually associated with postal duties, conducting a penguin census. The post office at Port Lockroy is sometimes called the Penguin Post Office. It owes this cute name to the Gen 2 penguins that thrive there. In addition to penguin counts and site maintenance, workers welcome around 18,000 tourists each Antarctic summer. It's a simple life for the workers, who share a room and have no running water. Only on rare occasions can they communicate with home via a satellite connection. However, the scenery is splendid, and according to Lauren Elliott, one of the 2019 postmasters, the experience is worth the isolation. She calls Port Lockroy the most magical place in the world.
French startup fights light pollution with bacteria. As night falls over Rambouillet, a small French town near Paris, street lights switch on. Soon, those lights will be an unusual blue, thanks to the efforts of Glowy, a French startup. Glowy's aim is to light cities with bioluminescence in order to reduce electricity usage and light pollution. Bioluminescence is the remarkable natural process by which certain organisms produce light. In the case of Glowy's lamps, a kind of bacteria called Vibrio fichteri is responsible for the blue-green glow. It's gathered off the coast of France and stored in tubes of salt water that are injected with a mix of nutrients. When air is pumped through the tubes, the bacteria consume the oxygen in the air and begin to glow. The lights can be turned off by halting the flow of air. The biggest downside to Glowy's light tubes is that they are considerably dimmer than most modern LED lights. However, with continued research, Glowy is confident that it will be able to improve the nighttime environment in cities, first in France, then around the world.
Okay, let's begin to talk about the first news story for this month. It's about some people from Cambridge, England, who head down to Antarctica about this time every year. Now, we begin with the title here, Antarctic Summers at the Penguin Post Office. And, of course, if you're talking about something that takes place at the bottom of the world, then we say it's Antarctic. The name of that continent is Antarctica, and so the adjective is Antarctic. So summers in the Antarctic could also be described as Antarctic summers, and there is a post office for penguins down there.
Wow, penguins get their own post office? We're going to find out more about this. Remember, this is a headline if it's a title on a news story. We don't say something's a headline, though, on a paper you write. Maybe you're writing a paper for class. No, that's just your title. But if it's a news story, then the title is a headline. And sometimes we will skip all of the words needed for a complete sentence. No, headlines are kind of like the headlines here in your newspapers in Taiwan, where you'll skip characters sometimes, which makes it hard for foreigners to understand what you're trying to talk about. But we do that too. So you'll often see headlines and you might think, the grammar seems wrong on this. Well, it's a headline, so they'll skip words to save space. So this area we're talking about, in the first sentence, we're going to go back to England, which is in Great Britain, and there's a city called Cambridge, and that's where the university called Cambridge is located as well. It's a beautiful city. It's quite small. There are only about 100,000 people that live there. It's really nice. And notice we have Cambridge, England. There's also a Cambridge in the Boston area in the United States. We're not talking about that one. So this is Cambridge, England, and it's cold in October. If you've never been to England in the fall and winter, it's quite chilly, and they don't have a lot of heating available. It seems like to me I was cold everywhere. But it is cold in October, but not as cold as what Tom was talking about, the place called Antarctica. So this is just one of the challenges that face the trainees in Cambridge this month. So if you're a trainee, you could be working anywhere, actually, but you're someone who's new on the job and you're being trained so that you'll become a professional one day. Maybe you're interning somewhere, or maybe you're just out of high school and you're learning the ropes with somebody like a plumber or an electrician. You're learning your trade that way. You could be a trainee.
Exactly, and they're preparing for seasonal postmaster positions at Port Lockroy in Antarctica. I should mention that Port Lockroy is actually on an island that is next to Antarctica. It's not technically in Antarctica, but if you're down there that far south, technically you're in that area. So yes, you're in Antarctica, and yes, indeed, these are seasonal positions, which means they're jobs that don't last the whole year. Sometimes, if you're trying to save money for something, you can get a seasonal job. I got some seasonal jobs back in my hometown before I came to Taiwan to save money. It was helping people sort their taxes, which was in the spring, basically. It was a seasonal job. It only lasted about 3 months. And so these seasonal jobs involve being a postmaster, which is the person who runs a post office.
Yeah, one of my seasonal jobs was in high school, and I would get up at about 4:30 in the morning in the summer and go and do yard work with one of my friends. It was hot and hard, but we got paid quite well. But yeah, those are seasonal jobs. Maybe if you're off during the summer, you get a chance to pick up some work somewhere and make some money. That's always a good thing. So these are seasonal jobs, and the postmasters, as Tom said, means they're helping to run a post office. These are at Port Lockroy in Antarctica. They'll spend around 5 months at the tourist destination. So we know right away this is kind of a fun place to go if tourists want to go there as well. And what they're doing is they're staffing the UK Antarctic Heritage Trust historical buildings. And they're in charge of operating the post office there. So this is a place that the British have set up in Antarctica. It's a Heritage Trust group that has done this. They've got some historical buildings they want to preserve, and those trainees are operating the post office there. It sounds like a fun place to go for the summer.
Yep, they're staffing it. That means they're members of the staff, and they'll have one other task that isn't usually associated with postal duties, however, and that is conducting a penguin census. So here we've got the verb to associate, and it's often used with the preposition with, to associate with something else. So what kind of duties are associated with being a postmaster? Well, you have to be there to answer the phone, you have to answer questions, you have to run the operation, you have to make sure everything's smooth. So those are some duties associated with that job. In this particular case, they've got another duty, and they need to conduct a penguin census, which means you count how many penguins there are.
This word associate we use a lot. It's a verb, of course. We also have a noun that's spelled exactly the same, but it's pronounced differently, and that's associate with an is sound, a short I sound. If you're an associate with some firm or company, it means you work there and you have a job there. But if you associate with something or someone, it means they put you together, like we often associate America with apple pie and baseball, things that come to mind when people think of America. When I was in France, the French often associated American tourists with tennis shoes because we all wore sneakers because they're comfortable, right? But the French, they don't think that sneakers are classy enough. So yeah, they would mock us or make fun of us with our tennis shoes. Hey, comfort is important, especially if you're walking around. So we use that word a lot. Remember, if it's the noun form, guys, it's a different sound. So associate with a long E sound or A sound there, associate, and noun is associate. So yeah, they're there to conduct a census, which just means an official count of some sort of population. We have to take censuses in America every once in a while because we have a representative government, which means we elect representatives for a group of people. And once you have enough people, then you get an additional representative. And so every, I think, 10, 20 years, I'm not sure.
It's 10.
They just did one in 2020. They will count the number of citizens and see which states get to add a representative if they've grown in population.
Exactly. And the next paragraph here says the post office at Port Lockroy is sometimes called the Penguin Post Office, and it owes this cute name, or it has this cute name because of the Gentoo penguins that thrive there. Of course, there are many different species of penguins. This species is called the Gentoo penguins, and they thrive there, which means they live there, and they eat, and they sleep there, and they have friends there, and they have babies there. They're doing quite well there.
If you're thriving somewhere, it means you're flourishing, you're doing very well, you're growing, and you're happy. Those are all good things. So in addition to penguin counts and site maintenance, workers welcome around 18,000 tourists each Antarctic summer. This is a place for me to go, I think, Tom, because I hate being hot. This last summer, I watched my sister take her family to Alaska, and I thought, I'm in the wrong place. I need to go to Alaska where it's a little cooler, although I don't think I'd like the winters there. So they do have quite a few tourists that show up every summer. It says here it's a simple life for the workers. Remember, these are trainees or seasonal workers. They share a room, so they have roommates, but they have no running water. Wow.
Indeed, so they probably have bottled water and they probably can't take showers every day. They have to conserve their water. So indeed, that's what's happening there. They're there for 5 months, and only on rare occasions can they communicate with home via a satellite connection. So they can only communicate with home on rare occasions. That's another way you can phrase that. And they do this via satellite connections or a satellite connection. Obviously, a signal cannot reach that far using a traditional cell phone network, so they have to go via a satellite, a machine flying in orbit around Earth, and they can do this only rarely. They can't do it all the time, I guess, because you just can't contact the satellite whenever you want to.
They would have to have a satellite phone as well. Those are quite expensive. I've looked into them. They're really expensive. So it says here, however, and this is probably a way to talk about the positive aspects of this area. Remember, we just told you a couple of the downsides. They can't really connect with their family and friends very often. Who can afford a satellite phone? Not many people. And they don't have running water. They have to share a room. So what are the positive aspects? Well, however, it says the scenery is splendid. It's probably quite beautiful, I can imagine. Scenery is what the land around you looks like. We don't talk about sceneries. Remember, if you go to a country, you could just say, oh, the scenery in France or the scenery in Japan was beautiful. Lots of different scenes. A scene is countable. Scenery is usually a non-count there. Just the natural features of an area as you look on to a landscape and you consider what it looks like. I'm sure it was quite lovely there. And according to Lauren Elliott, that's the name of one of the girls, she was one of the 2019 postmasters, so she was a trainee that year. The experience is worth the isolation. What is isolation, Tom?
Isolation means you're separated from the rest of the world and from other people. You're all there by yourself. And so isolation, of course, occurs when you're in parts of the world that are far away from big cities and places like that, like, say, in Xinjiang in China or in Siberia in Russia. You would experience isolation there, or you would be isolated. The verb is to isolate. And yes, indeed, she thought it was worth it. She didn't really care that she was so far away from the rest of the world because the scenery was splendid, and she calls Port Lockroy the most magical place in the world. And indeed, it's something that she could brag about for the rest of her life, having lived in Antarctica for 5 months. Everybody would like to have that experience.
Yeah, how many have actually been there? Very few. Right now, we're going to take a quick break. No Chinese teacher, guys, but stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. It's our News Watch unit. It's also our All English unit, which means we don't have our Chinese teacher today to help us explain even more clearly about what some of these phrases and words mean. We just finished up our first news story, which is about spending a summer in the Antarctic and at the Penguin Post Office. And we talked about how it's a chance for some trainees in Cambridge to go to this beautiful area of the world. They actually are in Port Lockroy, which is, as Tom said, a small island off of the continent there. They spend about 5 months. It's a tourist destination, and they help staff the Heritage Trust historical buildings in the area. They also operate the post office. But they are also tasked with one other job they have to get done, and that's conducting a penguin census, or counting up and seeing how many penguins are still there.
Right, and of course they're isolated, so they can only talk to home or people back home on rare occasions via a satellite connection. But the scenery is splendid there, and one of the postmasters in 2019 said it was worth it. The isolation was worth it. It's the most magical place in the world. So there you have it. Maybe someone from Taiwan could go there someday and operate a post office there as well. Who knows?
Yeah.
Now, another story we have for today is happening in France here. We've got a French startup, and it's fighting light pollution with bacteria. Light pollution is a problem if you like stargazing, if you like looking at stars and planets and constellations and galaxies and things like that. And if you live in a city, there's lots and lots of light, and it's very difficult to see stars and constellations and stuff like that. And this French startup, or this new French company, wants to change that using bacteria. That sounds kind of unusual.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? How do you fight light pollution with bacteria? One of the things I really miss since I've come to Taiwan, and I live in Taipei, which is a big city, is just seeing the stars at night. We can see the moon, which I'm grateful for, but I rarely ever get a chance to see the night sky with all those stars. When I was growing up in my neighborhood, there wasn't a lot of light at night, so we could go out and sit outside in the backyard and look up into the sky, and you'd see all those beautiful stars. I love stars. And we would also use our telescope to see if we could see some of the planets if we were lucky. So, yeah, I don't like a lot of light pollution. So how are they fighting this? We're going to be talking about a place called Rambouillet. It's a small French town near the big city of Paris, which you've all heard of. And they are using bacteria as street lights, or you could say they're substituting their old-fashioned street lights with something that comes from bacteria.
This happens all over the world, of course. When night falls, the street lights switch on, and Rambouillet is no exception. And soon, though, these lights will be an unusual blue thanks to the efforts of Glowy, a French startup. Again, that's a new company. A startup is a new company, and this one's called Glowy. And they're going to have those lights be in an unusual blue color. Okay, that's kind of strange. Usually the lights are kind of a brown color. Sodium vapor lights are kind of yellow-brown. I don't know if they use sodium vapor lights anymore. Everybody's using LED lights these days. But these lights are going to be in an unusual blue color. That's pretty weird.
I think it's weird too. So it says here they're an unusual blue thanks to the efforts of this company Glowy, a French startup, as Tom was talking about. My last job in New York, I was with a startup. If you get a chance to work for a startup, grab it. It is so much more fun than a big corporation. You get a chance to do a lot of different things, and it's exciting. Well, Glowy's aim, or their goal, is to light cities with something called bioluminescence in order to reduce electricity usage and light pollution. Bioluminescence. Anytime you see bio, you know something that has to do with life. So something that's alive. And luminescence, they use this word a lot, ladies, for makeup and skincare. If they say something is very luminescent, it means something's kind of glowing on your skin. Guys, you probably don't care about that stuff. Who wants your skin to glow if you're a guy? Well, maybe some people out there. But bioluminescence means glowing, and it's something that's alive.
Right, because it involves biology. So you can see this sometimes on seashores, I guess, when waves wash in some places you can see this bioluminescence. And they're using this to reduce electricity usage, and they want to reduce light pollution. Usage just refers to how much of something you use. So, of course, when we have droughts in Taiwan, they try to reduce water usage. They try to get people to conserve water. And in this particular case, they want to reduce electricity usage. And bioluminescence is the remarkable natural process by which certain organisms produce light. So it's a process, and we've got certain living things or organisms, and they can produce light.
We're all organisms if you're alive, so it's an individual animal, plant, or even a single-celled life form. Those all qualify as organisms. We tend to refer to ourselves as humans, of course, and animals as animals, but we're all organisms, living organisms, and these organisms are producing light. In the case of Glowy's lamps, and that's what they're producing, a kind of bacteria called Alivibrio fischeri is responsible for the blue-green glow. That's the kind of color it looks like. Sometimes we mix colors together. Blue-green is sometimes described as being turquoise. It's an aqua color. We have lots of color words in English. That's one of my favorite mixtures of color, though, is blue with green. So that's what this particular organism or the kind of bacteria they're using looks like. They have that glow that's quite lovely.
And where do they get this special bacteria? Well, it's gathered off the coast of France. So they go out there and they collect it, and then this bacteria is stored in tubes. I guess I should say these bacteria, because bacteria is plural.
Yeah.
The bacteria is gathered off the coast of France and stored in tubes of salt water, and then they are injected with a mix of nutrients, I guess, to keep that bacteria alive.
Yeah, because bacteria needs to keep feeding or eating to stay alive. I did want to mention this weird name for the bacteria is Latin. It's the science name that we assigned it at some point when someone discovered it. You don't see this kind of Latin being used usually, but in science, or if you go to med school, you're going to have to learn some of these terms that are kind of difficult to pronounce even for native speakers. Again, Tom and I didn't grow up speaking Latin, as you know, but that's where some of these weird names come from. So they do have to feed the bacteria once they harvest it, you could say. And when air is pumped through the tubes of salt water that have the bacteria and some nutrients they've added, the bacteria consume the oxygen in the air, and that's when they begin to glow. So that's the whole process. If you consume something, you eat it or you use it. We consume food, but we also consume energy, right? Gasoline, oil, we consume those things, but we are also called consumers when we buy things in the marketplace. What is appealing to consumers is what companies want to make so they can market it and sell more stuff. But consume is just a verb here. Consumer, of course, is the noun form.
So the bacteria consume the oxygen, and then the bacteria begin to glow, and the lights can be turned off by halting the flow of air. So they just deny the bacteria the oxygen, and then the blue light turns off. To halt means to stop something. So remember, they start to pump oxygen in there to get the bacteria to consume the stuff there to consume the oxygen and then to glow. And then when they stop the flow of air, then they turn off.
It's so interesting. That's crazy. I always sit there and think, who actually figured this out, for the first time? Moving on to the final paragraph, this is the biggest downside to glowy light tubes is that they are considerably dimmer than most modern LED lights. I have noticed that, the more modern the street lights are, the less light you get. And I feel a lot less safe outside going down some of the streets. When I was growing up, or when Tom was growing up, our street lamps were quite bright, and I felt safe, but I'm not feeling so safe anymore. Well, this is another downside. A downside is a negative aspect to something. It's something that's not a benefit. It detracts from what that thing is. So they aren't very bright. They're considerably dimmer. To be dim is just very, very low light. You can hardly see anything if the light is dim.
Dim also means someone is not particularly intelligent or not very smart, but they tend to use that more often in the UK. Don't hang out with him. He's a bit dim. But in this particular case, dim just means not very bright. And LED lights seem to be replacing all kinds of lights out there, but LED lights are pretty bright. It depends on how you use them. However, with continued research, Glowy is confident that it will be able to improve the nighttime environment in cities, first in France, then around the world. So, yes, indeed, right now the lights are not very bright. They're kind of dim, these lights produced by bioluminescence, but they hope to improve the brightness in the future, and hopefully it will be more common, not just in France, but in other parts of the world.
Sounds pretty cool, huh? You might want to check that out, see how they do in the next year or two, see if they keep getting more and more customers or consumers of their new type of lamps. Right now, guys, it's time for us to say goodbye. We don't have the Chinese teacher here, but we're sure glad you joined us. Please join us for our next program on English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Tom. Goodbye.
Bye.